listens. When Steel talks, everybody listens.
Asked me to do this because I was very intrigued by sort of the intersection of creativity and technology and where they sometimes meet, they sometimes crash in the middle of the intersection, but kind of every creative thing that I've ever done, along with my partner Terry Lewis, has really been in some part driven by the technology that existed. And how many people weren't born in 1981, right? Look at that, that's amazing. All right, so there you go. So the idea of what I'm going to try to talk about, and I'm going to read what it says here. I don't really do speeches. I really like to have conversations. So the one thing I will say is at a point, probably pretty early on here, I'm going to open it up for questions or for dialogue, because I think that's really what's important. I mean, you guys are here to learn, to embrace your craft, whatever that is, and I want to make that possible. So that is one of the things I'm going to do is open it up. But the current and future the current and future direction of the recording process from an artist, engineer, and producer's perspective. That's sort of the overview. Now, I thought that was a pretty songwriter to that. I'm very proud to do that. Now, the idea of being an engineer, that's kind of generous to me. That title is a pretty generous title, because I don't really consider myself an engineer. To me, an engineer is someone who's gone to school, he has credentials, he or she, I should say, have credentials, you know what you're talking about, you know what it is. I mean, in the old days, you know, in cars, right, you had controls for your stereo, and it was basically bass and treble. And that's what you had. You wanted more bass, and you turned the bass up. You wanted more treble, you turned the treble up. And that was about it. And then, when I got, this is going back to, maybe in the late 70s or something, I got myself a car, and it had what was called a parametric EQ. And that was where, besides just bass and treble, now you had like 8 or 9 little slider knobs and stuff that you could move around and really perfect the sound the way that you want to, try to make it sound as good as it could possibly sound. Now the funny thing about that was the way I engineered it, everything looked like a smile. A bunch of bass on the bottom and a bunch of treble on the top, and that's all I ever knew. And I remember walking into the mastering lab when we did our first records, and I was looking for the little parametric EQ, and there wasn't one. There was a bunch of knobs and stuff. And the engineer would like tweak the knob just a little bit and go, "How's that sound?" Yeah, sounds good. Then he'd take it and do another. I'm going to add 1 dB here. How's that sound? Like it did before. And I kind of walked over, and I probably pissed him off. So I walk over, and I said, "Now, where's the low end at?" And he said, "Oh, that would be over here." And I said, "Oh, okay," because my friend told me that we needed to put more low end on the record, and I just grabbed this knob and went, and I'll mention that guy by name. His name is Brian Gardner, and he works with Bernie Grumman, very famous mastering lab in LA. And Brian actually got the name Big Bass because he started doing a lot of the Dr. Dre records and those kinds of records. And I always like to say I was like the first person that really made him Big Bass Brian Gardner, because I went in and I just went, and I said, "That's the button you got to use." And I think he did all of his records. So, you know, the thing is, doesn't necessarily make me an engineer. I always feel like at least I can get something on, well, in the old days, on tape, and then the real engineers can figure it out, make it sound better, and make me look really good and go, "Wow, that distortion on there, man, that sounds really good." And it's like, yeah, because I recorded it too loud. I did. It wasn't knowledgeable, like that's what I was trying to do. I grew up in Minneapolis, and a lot of people know Minneapolis for many things, but Prince being one of them. And I actually went to junior high with Prince, and we used to take a music class together, and we used to get out of class and we'd go to this little keyboard room and stuff, and the teacher would give us Mary Had a Little Lamb, and we'd go, okay, thanks, teacher, and we'd put the headphones on, and then when the teacher would leave, we'd be in there just jamming away and stuff, and it was great, and that was really like my introduction to like music in school. That was like, okay, music in school, that's what I want to do. When I was really young, in 4th grade, I like played the clarinet, right? Because that was like, I don't know, I didn't feel I could like blow a trumpet or anything. So I said, okay, clarinet, okay, that's going to be cool. I did that. And a couple of years later, I noticed that really the clarinet and the saxophone were the same thing, but the difference was the saxophone was like, the girls liked the saxophone. Because nobody was like, oh yeah, he plays a clarinet. It's like, no, it wasn't working, you know, so the saxophone was working, it was working. And I realized that like music, beyond, you know, making me feel good and something I really loved to do, you know, the girls liked that, you know, it was like, that was incentive for me, you know, and still is, as a matter of fact. So, even though I'm married, but I like to impress my wife and daughter and other people, right? So that's like a big deal to me. But growing up in my house, I remember the technological stuff that happened. I remember when we got our first color TV. Like that was like amazing. Color TV, can you believe that? And then we got a little home tape recorder that actually had like it was reel to reel, but it was tiny. It was like, you know, 1/4 inch tape, and you could actually record music onto it. And that was like amazing. And then there was like 8 tracks. And it was like 8 track, oh man, all the music's on this little thing. Forget the big vinyl records, now there's like a little 8 track. It's like, man, this is amazing stuff. And when I was growing up, there was always keyboards around my house because my dad played. So I used to get on the keyboards all the time, and I always thought of myself though as a drummer. I always liked the idea of drums and rhythm and that kind of stuff. So I used to bang a drum set around and do all that kind of stuff. When I got about 12 years old, my dad used to play, he used to have a band, and they never could keep the drummer, right? So one day I went to one of his shows, and the guitar player in the band said, why don't you let your son play? He knows all your songs. And my dad said, I don't know, he's a little young, I'm not really sure. I'll give him a chance. So I go up and play, and it worked out really well. So next time I go, same thing, can't find the drummer, whatever. Why don't you let him play a set with you? Okay, all right, so do that. So I went and played a set with my dad. By the time 2 or 3 weeks went by, I actually became my dad's drummer. And that was like my first professional gig at 12 years old. I was playing drums in my dad's band. And my mom was like my first agent. Because, well, literally, because what happened was my mom would say, you know, my dad was like, oh yeah, this is great, you know, yeah, come on and play. And she said, well, you have to pay him. And he said, well, okay, well, I'll give him $10 or I'll give him whatever. She said, no, you have to pay him exactly like you pay a drummer. He's your drummer. So she negotiated like my first deal and stuff. So it was like, you know, I knew my mom was real cool. So I did that. And then that summer, I met the person that really changed my life, and that's my partner, Terry Lewis. And we're going back to like 1972. So that means I've known Terry over 40 years. And we were in a program called Upward Bound. And the whole idea of the program was to teach. It was called peer teaching, right? The idea was if you were an 8th grader, you could teach a 7th grader math and they would understand it from you better than maybe from the teacher, right? So that was the concept. And I thought, okay, that's a pretty cool concept. And I was horrible at math. So I thought, okay, if I learn to teach math, it'll make me learn math better. And it made me learn how to teach math. It did not make me good at math. But what I got early on was the idea of kind of that everybody can be a teacher. Like you don't need a credential to be a teacher. I mean, everybody can impart their knowledge and that. So I think that was a really important lesson that I learned early on. But when I met Terry, Terry was the one that said to me, man, I need a keyboard player for my band. And I said, well, Terry, I play drums. And he said, nah, but you can play keyboards. And I said, how do you know how to play keyboards? He said, because your dad plays keyboards. So that means you know how to play keyboards. Okay, well, Terry Lewis logic, okay, fine. So anyway, when I heard the drummer he had, he said, I got a drummer already. The drummer he had was a guy named Jelly Bean Johnson. Okay, well, he ended up being the drummer in the time. And after I saw Jelly Bean, I was like, yeah, let's go get the keyboards. I can do that. So anyway, we got together, we played a little gig at the end of school, and Terry and I were basically inseparable ever since then. Even though we played in like rival bands. Like growing up in Minneapolis, if anybody saw the movie Purple Rain, there was this it was kind of a fictionalized version of what was going on in the Minneapolis music scene, which was kind of this, competition where there was, 3 slots at the club for a band, but there were 4 bands that wanted to play. And you had to be the best band in order to get in there and do that. That was very much what it was like in Minneapolis. Prince had his own band, Morris Day had his own band. Actually, Morris and Prince used to play together, then Morris got his own band. And I had my own band, and Terry had his own band, and we were all like in competition with each other, trying to, play in clubs and do that kind of thing. And of course, Prince made it out, and Prince came back to us and he said, you guys are the best band. After we put everybody together, Morris is going to join your band, and then basically we're gonna make a record. So that was kind of the evolution of the way, all of that stuff happened when I was young. But those days were very impactful because around that, when I was 16, I produced my very first record, and it was a group called Mind and Matter. Now, the only reason I mention this is because there's a label called Numero Group out of Chicago that has kind of unearthed all these old recordings and stuff, including that record. And it was like the first time I'd heard the record since I did it. They said, we found the record, we're going to put it out. Do we have your permission? I said, yeah, absolutely, it's great stuff. So it's kind of fun to go back and hear the things we were trying to do. But I remember going to the studio, and the studio was in the basement of a house. And it was just a little studio, it had a little soundboard and everything. And I remember we walked in with all this equipment and all these keyboards and made the record. So I was thinking about sort of the technological aspect of that. In that day, you could basically do sort of a cassette to cassette thing, and some of you may be familiar with this. You had a cassette. First of all, do people know what a cassette is? I'll tell you what sums me up, by the way. I'm very sort of technologically advanced in some ways. So the thing is, I have an iPhone. I don't know if you guys can see that. Oh no! I thought my picture was up there. Okay. Anyway, they blew the budget getting me here. Anyway, so okay. So anyway, take my word for it. This is an iPhone. Take my word for it. The case that the iPhone is in, cool. Cassette. Okay, right? So that basically kind of sums me up. I got one foot looking forward and the other foot is stuck in the past. So I love my cassette. But anyway, in the old days, we used to go back and forth on cassettes, and that's how you overdub. Like, so if you put your vocal down, then you'd record it to the next cassette, and then you'd sing a vocal, right? And that would be sort of like multi-tracking. That was the idea of doing that. So the idea of creating these songs, and now all of a sudden going to this studio was like, oh my God, we're in a studio. I can't believe it. And we recorded these songs, and it was an amazing experience. And I was hooked on music at that point, and I did everything. I DJ'd, I worked at a record store and ordered records. I worked for a record pool, for clubs and stuff. I did everything. I just immersed myself into everything that was music related. And one of the big things for me growing up was, and I've talked about this before, you may have seen a campaign that I was involved with called Give the Fans Credit, which is basically, or Give Fans the Credit, which is basically an idea that, when I grew up, I was a liner note reader. If you guys know, who knows what liner notes are? Okay, so liner notes, when you used to get albums in the old days, right, and we're talking vinyl albums, and you would take the album out, and most of the time, as you were listening to it, there would be the credits of all the people that worked on the album. So now imagine me, I'm in Minneapolis, and, snowed in, probably, and I'm sitting in my house, and I'm looking, and as I'm listening to this album is coming to life orally for me, because I'm hearing it, but also now I'm reading, and I'm reading the studio it was recorded at, who the musicians were that played on the record. I'm hearing, I'm looking at the songwriters who wrote it. I'm looking at who produced it, who took the album, the cover of the album, who the art director was. All of that information was right there in front of us. which was so cool to me. Because what I realized at an early age was there were certain artists that I really liked, but even more so, there were certain producers and certain writers that I liked. Like, I would hear a record by a certain artist and I'd go, oh, I love that artist. And then the next album I'd hear and I'd go, I don't like him. What's the difference? And I'd look at the liner notes and I'd go, oh, you know what? They used a different producer, or they used a different studio, or something was different. You could tell. There were certain sounds of certain records. I remember there was a place called Chicago Recording, and there was an engineer named Barry Mraz. Never met this guy in my life, don't know anything about him. He had the best sounding compression that I've ever heard on a record. And he ended up doing Ohio Players and a bunch of my favorite bands, growing up. So that was always a big impression to have that. Now, we live in what we kind of call the information age, right? So now when you download a song, where's the liner notes? You hear something you like and you go, man, that's good. Who wrote that? Who produced that? Who played that? Who engineered it? The credits don't exist. Now, in the information age, and when we talk about technology, it might be credits may be the only thing that exists, or that doesn't exist now, that existed back then. In every other way, we're moving forward at a great clip, right? But those don't exist. So I say that to say that the reason I'm even doing what I'm doing as a writer and a producer was because of looking at liner notes. And I think it's important that if you go to Grammy.com, there's a tab on there that will talk about give fans a credit, or giving the fans a credit. And it's all about just giving the information out that needs to be there. It's important because the people that work behind the scenes really are important and they really make things happen. So that's very important. So I tell that story to say when me and Terry finally, we were in the time and we were touring and we're doing our thing. And Terry one day goes, I think I want to go to LA. Who wants to come? And everybody said, man, you crazy. Why you want to go to LA? What's going on in LA? And Terry just said, they need us out there. And they're like, well, what are you talking about they need? He said, no, we're not. He said, I don't know. And I said, so Terry, I said, listen, Terry and I were good friends. And I said, Terry, what are we going to do out there? Where are we going to stay? Oh, we'll figure it out. Okay. Well, what are we going to do? We'll make some demos. What are we going to make the demos on? We don't really have any equipment. Oh, we'll figure it out. All right, cool. So I said to Terry, you know what? Okay, Terry, let's go to LA. I'm down with you. Terry said, great. Jam's coming with me. Who else wants to come? And everybody's in the band. Now, I have to just frame this by saying now, we were making $250 a week. We had 2 gold albums, touring with Prince, $250 a week, and then they were taking taxes out of that. So it was basically about $173 a week was what we were making. So we weren't doing it for the money, I can tell you that. But everybody had saved, when you're on the road, they give you per diem, right? So you can eat every day. They give you like a little, food thing, right? So everybody had saved their per diem. So what is everybody saving their per diem for? To buy a VCR. Because that was the technology. Man, you crazy. I ain't going to LA. I save my money. I'm buying a VCR. I'm going to sit in front of a TV and watch my VCR. And VCR, so you could record programs off the television. Now, I know this sounds to your younger people, you're like going, what? But I lived through this, right? So, this is what's so fun to me, is that it's living through this stuff. So anyway, they all go get their VCR. Me and Terry latch on to a couple of friends of ours that used to live in Minneapolis that had a house. They said, we really don't have any room. We have like 1 bedroom that's probably about as big as kind of where I'm standing right here. They said, you guys can put a couple cots in there and, if you want to bunk in there. So that became where we would do our demos. And we got, now at this point in time, the technology, you could get cassettes, but they were 4-track cassettes. And we found one in the classifieds of the paper. We got that. We had a microphone. I had a little Casio keyboard about this big that had a little drum machine built in. And then we had our best friend, a bathroom. Because we didn't have a reverb unit. We didn't know what reverb units were. But we knew if we sang in the bathroom, it's like when you sing in the shower and it sounds great. That's what the bathroom sounded like. So we knew we could go into the bathroom and do our demos. And that was our technology. That was our reverb, was the bathroom. So we put our little demo together. We sent it out. Everybody bid on it. Everybody liked different songs and stuff. And kind of our recording career at that point was on its way. And I remember the first time we walked into like a big recording studio, there was a gentleman named Leon Silvers. Now, we were a big fan of Leon Silvers. Leon Silvers there was a record company called Solar Records. Leon Silvers did Shalimar and the Whispers and a lot of the big groups at the time. He was like the guy. And he put us in the studio. He was the one that said, just go in the studio and just create. So they had what was called 24-hour lockout. Now, that meant 24 hours, the studio was yours, and nobody else could come in the studio. So we thought, okay, that sounds like a plan. So now, Terry and I are in Minneapolis working on the time stuff, but we would, on the weekends, we'd fly to LA and try to do our production and our writing stuff, right? So I remember wherever we went to our first session, we walk in, engineer is a guy named Tavi Mote, right? Nice guy. So Tavi, what's going on, man? Yeah, great. What are we working on? Well, we got a couple song ideas we're gonna do. So we start working on our song ideas. So now it's getting late, it's getting later. And Tavi says,
When Steel Talks.
Hey guys, what time do you think you're going to wrap up? And we said, we looked at our watches and we were like, well, we got 24-hour lockout. We're going to be here 24 hours. and Tavi said, no, that's not what it means. It means that nobody else can come in the studio for 24 hours. It's like, yeah, right, that's why we're here. We ain't going nowhere. And literally, we drove him crazy. Because literally, I would fall asleep, Terry would keep working, and Terry would fall asleep, and I keep working. That's what it was like to be in a studio. That was like the greatest. I mean, if somebody just said at that point, man, you can just go in the studio and work, that was like the oasis for us. That was the greatest thing ever. And we made a lot of great records out of those sessions doing that, and drove engineers absolutely crazy. And the reputation got out. Who are you working with today? These guys, Jam and Lewis. You don't want to work, man. Is it 24-hour lockout? You don't want to work with these guys. You're going to be there 20. Trust me, they're different. They're from Minneapolis. They're different. Okay, they don't know what's happening. So I remember the technology then was 24-track tape. That's what it was. Analog board and the whole thing. Really great sound. It was really about great musicianship. So then, when it came time to mix some of the stuff. Now we had a really, actually I'll fast forward a little bit because we had a really interesting studio experience. We went down to Atlanta to produce a group called the SOS Band. And we got caught in a snowstorm down there. Now there's various versions of this story and I'm just going to do a really short one. I will say that the story is true. We did get caught in a snowstorm down there doing SOS Band. We subsequently missed the Next Time concert, which was in San Antonio, Texas. So eventually, when Prince found out about that, he had already told us, in sort of my Prince voice, I told you guys not to produce any other acts. And you did, so you're fired. So we were all, and I'm telling you, in this room, it was Prince, Jesse, Morris, me, and Terry. That was the only ones in the room. So we're like, okay. So I got up right away and left. Terry argued with Prince for a little while. So what had happened, we had booked time at Larrabee Studio in LA to mix this SOS Band song. So we walk into the studio, and in the studio is a guy named Steve Hodge. Now Steve Hodge, when you talk about engineers, Steve Hodge, okay, amazing. So, by the way, how did we know Steve Hodge? Because I read his name in the liner notes. I said, man, that's Steve Hodge, he mixes all the records we like. So when we do our mixes, we got to find Steve Hodge and we got to go to Larrabee Studios. And that's what we did. And we told him that. We said, hey man, you don't know us, we don't know you, but we heard your work and you got to work with us, So anyway, we do the record. It's a record called Just Be Good to Me. It ended up being our first #1 hit record. And our kind of career as engineers and producers were born. Now, when we did Just Be Good to Me, it was the first time, this was '83, this was the first time I'd ever seen, forget about a 24-track machine, now there's two 24-track machines that are linked together. It's like 48 tracks. Woo, man. We can stack vocals for days now. We can make a work tape and stack vocals. I know this is foreign to some of you, but okay, work tapes and analog and all that. But it was like a revelation, and it changed the way we created. It was like, oh man, we can just, it's not like we have to. Now we would still bounce everything down. By the way, it's interesting nowadays. You can just make as many tracks as you want, just endlessly, right? But I've always liked the idea of bouncing it down. So like when we would get our little harmony blend and stuff, and we'd stack vocals like 4 times at least on each of the vocals, on each of the notes. But then we'd always bounce them down, because there was something about the way that the vocal blend sounded if you did it in the moment that was better. And every time we didn't do that, we would be going back and trying to go, no, that first day we had it better, So you basically committed to it at that point, which I thought was always a great way of working. And we kind of try to do that now, and everybody goes, well, why do you want to do that? Everything it's all separate and stuff. It's like, nah, we like to do our little mix. But that was a revelation. And when I think about the technology that happened with keyboards, because I was a keyboard guy, and I remember doing an interview for Keyboard Magazine. Had chosen me for something. They liked something that I played, so they put me on the cover. And I said, you know what, I got to have my partner on the cover, even though he doesn't play keyboards, but we're a team. We got to be on the cover together. So they said, okay, yeah, that's fine, that's fine. So I remember in the interview we were talking about different kind of keyboards, and they said, wow, we really like. The interviewer was like, we really like the way your textures and your whatever, and we really like how you're doing that. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So what did you use to get the sound on, I don't know, Control, on the Janet Jackson Control album? What did you use? And I said, well, I said I used, there's a keyboard called a Mirage. And he looked at me like I'm crazy, a Mirage. Because Mirage was this little keyboard. It was a sampling keyboard, but the sample rate was horrible and the sound sounded horrible. It's like, well, wait a minute, how could you use that? I said, no, I don't know, I just plugged it in and I just used it. I mean, that was what sounded right to me in my mind. And the keyboards that existed were what I used. So then they said, but don't you go in and tweak the sounds, and don't you go in and do that? And I thought, no, I don't really do that, because don't they pay people to do that? Like at the factory when they make the keyboard? There's like experts. There's experts in there that are tweaking and we're going to get the best piano sound, and we're going to get the best Rhodes sound, and we're going to get the best. And I'm like going, if I sit down at the keyboard and I'm pressing a preset that says piano, if it doesn't sound like a piano, I'm not getting a keyboard. Right? I mean, I'm not going to tweak, oh, I can work on this and get this to sound. No, give me a keyboard that sounds like a piano. Or better yet, just give me a piano. That's all good too, So that was always kind of the theory I had. There's people in technology that are creating great things. Nobody was asking my opinion at that point on whether you like the way this sounded or whatever. Now it's interesting, because InSonic actually, as a company, actually at that point in time did come to us and go, we're creating a new keyboard, we'd love to send it to you before it comes out, and you can tell us what you like, what you don't like, and whatever. And they actually sought our input. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a pretty significant thing to do that, to have companies do that. And I thought it was very smart on their part to do that, because the art of collaboration, obviously I'm part of a collaboration with my partner Terry Lewis for many years, and I just think there's such a value in that. So I love the fact that a tech company was, at that time, a keyboard manufacturer, coming to us and saying that. And we had always kind of thought differently about keyboards anyway, because living in Minneapolis, it was kind of like, once again, I look at the liner notes, and so there'd be like, somebody would say, oh, we played a Moog this synthesizer, or we played an ARP synthesizer, right? And I'm like going, Moog and ARP, I little out of my price range. I can't do that. And plus, the early stuff looked like a telephone switchboard, right? There was like different stuff to plug in, and so I didn't know how to do any of that, But luckily, companies like Roland came along and did presets and just said, here's a sound, it sounds like a synthesizer. Okay, great, I'm with that. But the thing that really opened this up was, in Minneapolis in the early days, it was kind of like, we didn't know the right stuff to use, so we just used what was available. And for some reason, there was a company called Oberheim. And Oberheim had these synthesizers that, I remember when we went on the first time tour, they gave me this synthesizer that was huge. I mean, it was like, kind of like the podium tipped on its side, literally. And it had a bunch of knobs and stuff, but it had like 8 presets. And all I knew was, once you dialed in your stuff, you hit the preset button and there your sound was. And I remember we went on tour with Prince. And I remember we'd launch into Get It Up was one of our big records, or Cool was one of our big records. And our bass sound was killing Prince's bass sound, right? Because we had this big keyboard, right, that just was killing him. And so I remember walking on stage one night for sound check, and I got this little keyboard called an OBSX. And I said, what the heck is this? And they said, oh, we got rid of the old thing and this is the new thing. And I couldn't get that thing to sound like nothing. It was horrible. And I'm like going, wait, this is the same company that made that other thing? I said, oh, they should call me. Because I'm going to tell them, y'all blew it. Well, you got to make it sound like the other. Well, they didn't call me, but luckily about a year later, they came out with something called an OB8. Okay? And the OB8 had the sound like the old Oberheim thing, right? But being in Minneapolis, it wasn't that we were doing what everybody else was doing. We were thinking about it differently. So we used Oberheim synthesizers instead of ARP or Moog or whatever the popular one was. And our technological choices were always, I think, a little different looking back on it, because I remember we were into the Lindrum, which was pretty cool. I remember when everybody kind of got into like the SB1200 and some of these other drum machines and stuff, and we just were kind of like, no, we're cool with the Lindrum. We'll stick with that. That's kind of our signature sound. And then probably the biggest drum machine that for us was the 808, the Roland 808. Now the 808 is a drum machine that you've heard on every record. Matter of fact, for the young people, whenever you hear records now, because there's really not a lot of bass on records anymore, what there is now is kind of a drone at the bottom that kind of goes right? Anybody that's into hip hop, that's what it sounds like, right? Well, that drone at the bottom is an 808 kick drum. That's a kick drum from an 808 that gets tuned, right? And I remember we used the 808 and somebody said, man, it was so brilliant that you used the 808. And I said, well, we walked in the studio and we said, you got a drum machine? They said, yeah, what do you got? 808, okay, fine. That's what we used. So it's not, so once again, the technology drove the creativity. Because the beat for Just Be Good to Me and the beat for Tell Me If You Still Care and some of the old songs we did were driven because that was the drum machine was there, so that was the creativity that came out. So once again, tech and creative, intersected in a really cool way. And the 808 today is still probably the most used drum machine, although the sounds of the drum machine are used, the actual drum machine isn't used. I blew somebody's mind, I can't remember who it was, there was I can't remember who it was now, but it might have been somebody from like the Young Money crew or somebody, and they said, we need something that sounds like an 808, and I brought one out and I just said, here. And they said, what is that? I said, that's an 808. And he tweeted his friend, I called oh my God, it's an 808, it's a real 808, man. They got one up here. So, but it's amazing the way that technology and creativity just continues to intersect. I mean, it's just great, and I'm a product of it. And I remember, when everything from fax machines to two-way pagers. Two-way pagers used to be the baddest. That was like the baddest thing ever. And I remember sitting with somebody at Motorola. I happen to be good friends with Tiger Woods, and I'm a horrible golfer, but I'm a comic relief for him sometimes on the golf course. And we were at a dinner for him. And we were sitting there, and it was me and my wife, and we happened to be sitting next to these people from Motorola, and they were like, the geniuses at Motorola. And me and my wife are on with our two-way pagers, and we're like, as we used to do, we used to sit next to each other, but instead of talking to each other, we text each other back and forth. Like, that was so cool. I was like, this is great. Hey, look at the dude over there with what's he wearing? Or it's like, isn't that so-and-so's wife over there? It was like that kind of thing, right? So we never would have a conversation. So they looked over at us and they said, what are you guys doing? And we said, oh, we're just into our two-way pager. You heard about these? You know, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, yeah, we worked for Motorola. We invented those. And we were like, wow, that's awesome. Oh, we love this. Oh, we love it. Okay, so give us the knowledge. You know, what's the next thing? What's the next two-way pager going to be like? And they said, oh, we're discontinuing those. There's no more two-way pagers. We're moving on. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wait a minute, what are you doing? No, this is two-way pages. This is it. And they said, oh, you have no idea. This is the stuff that's coming. You're never gonna think about a two-way pager again. And they were absolutely right. And that conversation, though, once again, it just kind of summarizes that there's people out there with great ideas that are doing really brilliant things. And sometimes they don't even know what they have. And I remember when digital recording started really big. Now I remember Steve Hodge said to us, our engineer said to us, when digital tape machines came out, he said, you know what, I'd hold off on that because the transfer from digital actual tape, he said pretty soon it's not going to be any tape at all. And we're going, what? No tape? How can you do that? That's impossible. He said, no, it's already coming. So we said, okay, cool. So I remember we bought, kind of speaking about the difference of being in Minneapolis, I remember, matter of fact, it was at one of the AES shows, and I can't remember which one it was. There was a company called Harrison, and they came out with a board called a Series 10, right? Now, I love the Series 10 board because it was the first board to me that was really, truly what was a total recall board. Now, SSL had what they called total recall, and some of you may remember this, but what the idea was there was a TV screen, and what you had to do in order to recall your mix, right, to get your mix back up. So, you'd send your mix to the record company, and the record company would go, yeah, it sounds good. It could use a little more vocals. So now you're taking your 48, at that time, 48-track mix, you're putting it back on the board to turn a vocal up, right? So this is before stems and all that stuff, right? So you turn the vocal up a little bit, but it takes you 2 hours to just set the board up in the way that it was because you're looking at a little monitor and it's telling you as you're turning each knob where to stop, where the knob actually was. So it wasn't really total recall. So I remember Harrison, they said, listen, here's what we do for ours. If you want to recall the mix, you just press the button here, start the tape, and everything pops back up as it is, just like that. And we said, wow, that's brilliant. Okay, we love that. We'll take two. So we did. We had two of these Series 10. And we expected that, it was going to take the industry by storm, and this makes so much sense. But what we didn't know is, as we're sitting in our kind of isolated Minneapolis, was that SSL was it. Neve, SSL, they were it. Few people had Harrison. Few people had, API. There was a few different kind of things, but it was all about the standard. It was about, SSL was like the standard. You walked in the studio, if you didn't see an SSL, you'd go, no, not an SSL. So we were like, okay, shoot. So it didn't matter though, because we were still making our records, doing our own thing. So we got into the thing where, the records had hiss on them. Our records had hiss because it was tape, right? So we kept saying, we got to get into the analog thing. Well, then Dolby came to us and they said, hey, we got a thing. It's called Dolby SR. I said, Dolby SR, what does that do? It takes the hiss off of the tape. Really? Okay. What kind of tape machine do we need? It said it works with any tape machine, but if you have an Atari machine, it's built into the Atari machine. So we called Atari and we said, okay, we need 6 of those machines with the Dolby SR built in. And we made records like that for the longest time. And the other cool thing was that the tape went slower, so you use less tape. It was like 15 IPS. So instead of 30, for those of y'all that know inches per second. Okay, so, but you use less tape, so you could put more stuff on there, and the low frequencies were amazing on this stuff. And it was interesting because we had to just transfer some tape the other day that's in Dolby SR, and it's interesting that a lot of the engineers at the studios, they don't know about setting up an analog tape machine, they don't know about calibrating and all that kind of stuff. It's become sort of a lost art. And I hope as we continue to move forward technologically that we still continue to do that, because there's still a lot of great creativity on tape. Terry and I are putting an album together after like 30 years of talking about it, and some of the things on our album are things that go back to, 83 or 82 that we did on analog tape that we're like resurrecting. And it's funny because when you put the tape on, it still sounds amazing. And I wonder, going 30 years forward, when we pop in that hard disk, is it going to even be there anymore? So I think one of the questions we have to ask technologically is, what are we doing to preserve the great music and the great legacy that we have? So it's one of the things I'm interested to talk with the technology companies about, because we have such a rich legacy. I mean, you can go back and, VHS tapes, they still work. They look as bad as they did when they were out, but they still work. At least something's there. I don't know about digital, and I don't know whether anybody's figured that out. But I will say that it's cool to work with people like the Grammys, and I've done that for quite a while. And the involvement that the Grammys have as far as archiving and preserving is a very important thing. And I know Maureen Droney is in the room from the producers and engineers room, and I want to shout out to Maureen and the great work that the P&E wing is doing to keep sound alive and keep the preservation of music at the forefront, because it's really important. You can give her a little applause. I don't know where she's at. She's shy, so she may not stand up because she's pretty shy. I'm going to open it up to questions here in just a second, but I have a question for the room. How many people would consider themselves pessimists in the room? You guys look at the industry and you kind of go, oh man, this is screwed up. The way the music industry is not the same, and it's in a bad place. Show of hands, anybody feel like that? Pessimists in the room? That it's not how it used to be in that? Okay, and then how many people in the room would consider themselves optimists, that the future is bright, we're going to be okay? And a bunch of people didn't raise their hands for either one of those, so I don't know where we're at. I'm going to loop back to that later on, because I don't know what it is. But anyway, by the way, I want to talk about real quick too, like the first records I heard, like James Brown and Smokey Robinson and like those kinds of records, and what an incredible influence those records were. We're working with a company called DTS, who's involved in technology. And when I talk about, the idea of creativity and technology going together, they're a company that actually reached out to us along with some other kind of cool people like Elliot Shiner and Hans Zimmer and few no-name guys. And they said, we have a technology we're working on for surround, and would you guys be interested in helping us develop it? And I said, yeah. I said, as a matter of fact, I said, we would be very interested in that. And we were, once again, as I spoke about earlier, when the keyboard company actually asked our opinion on something, I love when tech companies ask our opinion on something, because I just think that in order for the product to be really good, that's the kind of thing that needs to happen, So anyway, we've been involved with this whole thing with surround sound and that whole thing, and it's very cool, very exciting. And so it got me thinking that, the records that were made back in the day, like the James Brown records and some of that, one of the things we did is we went back and mixed James Brown in surround sound. We got one of the masters. And it's the most amazing experience to hear this great music and the musicianship, because it sounds like, when you listen to it, it sounds like it's coming from watching James Brown on stage. Like the microphone's in the middle, the bass is over here, the guitar's over here. It's absolutely amazing technology. And just imagine if those masters weren't around anymore and we couldn't do that. We couldn't take the great music from the past and apply it to today's technology, where we'd be. So I just think it's so important that one of the things we concentrate on out of all the millions of things we have, because there's a lot on the plate here this weekend, but really the preserving of music and making sure that the masters that are made now preserve, so that down the line, whatever the technological advances that make that possible to hear music in a better way, that exists. I just think that that's really, really important. Thank you. I do. Let's see. I'm gonna see where I'm at here time-wise, because it's all about time. Okay, I got about 5 more minutes here, and I'm gonna open up for questions, so hopefully you guys have some. It's interesting because I was thinking about the way that recording happens nowadays, and I know, it's possible to do everything basically in a laptop nowadays. And I had a couple of kind of revelations about that, because I wouldn't say I'm an old school guy, but I would just say I went to school a while back. But I continue to go to, but I continue to go to school. That's the thing. Like I say, I'm an iPhone cassette type of guy. I like both ends. But I remember that we were involved with putting together a project for a Japanese artist, and we had done these old tapes from a long time ago. And then they decided that they actually liked the song and they wanted to redo it but it was in the wrong key and all that kind of stuff. And I was able to take it and put it in my laptop and literally sit at my kitchen table and manipulate the tracks and do all the things we needed to do to make it work. At the end of the day, they didn't use the song anyway because it was in the wrong key after all that work. But the things that can be done now are so different, than what could be done. And I think that's a pretty positive thing. Now, even coming here, as recently as last night, I had an experience like that. Now, most of you actually probably don't know. My brother-in-law is Kevin Garnett, who plays for the Nets. And he invited me to the Nets game last night. He said, "When are you coming in?" And I said, "I'm coming in, I was going to come in last night." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, if you can come in earlier, you can come to the Nets game and, play in the Heat, and it'd be great." So I thought, okay, wow, that would really be cool. So I'm a basketball fanatic, so I'm like, okay, so I got a project that I got to finish. There's no way I can finish this project. I said, I don't think I can get it done. So then I realized, I talked to my partner Terry, and Terry said, "Well, all you got to do is demo the vocal and do this and blah, 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 blah." And I thought, oh yeah, that is true. So anyway, I tell Kevin, "You know what, Kevin, I'm going to get on an early plane, I'm going to go." So when I got to his house, he said, "Here's the guest room, do you need anything?" I said, "I don't need anything." I opened my laptop, I sat on the bed with my headphones, and a little microphone, little blue, little USB microphone I have, and basically sang the little demo vocal parts so the singer would know what to sing. And at 5 o'clock, he called me and he said, "Okay, let's go to the game." And I said, "Okay, cool." I pressed send it to Japan, got the word back from Universal that they loved it, it was perfect. And it was an example of technology allowing me to go catch a basketball game, that's what technology should be about, right? That I can catch a basketball game. But it's just cool, there's so many experiences like that. And there's an analogy that kind of goes along with that, and I said it earlier, sort of. I think it's an idea that we're all teachers in our own way. Whether we have the credentials, we may not have the teaching credentials, but we're all teachers. So we're all creators. We're all technologists. We all are. And imagine if we work together and we pool all that together, just how far advanced we are. I think that's really the key, because I'm a guy that's all about collaboration. It's weird to be up here without my partner, at least somewhere around, but although he's always with me anyway, in some way. But I just think that that's the message. If there's an overall message that I would want to give, is that it's all about the collaboration. I think each side is going to make each other great. I want to mention one other guy, and that's Neil Portnow. Neil Portnow, who's the head of the Recording Academy. Because Neil was one of those people that we had conversations about it back when I was chairman, and we talked about that the technology side seems like it's here, the creators seem like they're here, we're not talking to each other, what happened to where's the love, what happened to the collaboration? And he put together a tech summit, basically, up in San Francisco, Leslie Ann Jones, I know, was a part of that. I don't know if she's in the room, but Leslie's a fantastic person in my life, and a former chair of the Recording Academy. But he put this together, and it was the first time that I remember, and probably one of the few times, that the tech industry sat at the same table as the creative industry, along with, you know, music publishers and labels, and everybody was all in the same room talking about what it is. And the thing we came away with, and the thing that is the reality today, is that no matter what the delivery system is, whether it's cassette, 8-track, you name it, right? iPod, iPad, iPhone, whatever that delivery system is, there's got to be something to deliver, okay? The creators are the people that make the stuff to deliver. So if you're building a business that involves creators, or that, you know, is going to build your business on creators, please include the creators in what you're doing. I think we can really help you do that. So that, to me, is what the collaboration is about. All right. So I'll open up for questions, and then I'll do a little departing, and I'll let you guys get on your way to all the other exciting stuff that's going on over here. I see a hand over there.
Yes, Jimmy Jam. My name is Kelly. I play keyboards with Alexander O'Neill.
Kelly, stand up. Stand up so everybody can see Kelly, go.
My question, you know, thinking back, I about 20 years now since, you know, I came on stage, played with you guys up in Vancouver when the first singles happened.
Ooh, Vancouver, love it.
Yeah, back next to Columbia.
Yep.
But I remember, you know, just out of high school, getting the gig and hearing this cassette demo of Faith, which went #1.
Yep.
And played our single Home Soul Train.
Yep.
But, you know, it takes me back, you talking about James Brown and that creative process and how technology now has turned us into kind of a copy and paste world where, you know, you take a song like Faith, which had that linear groove, that James Brown thing, and that Minneapolis thing that I grew up and learned from this gentleman here, about playing that song from beginning to end, rehearsing those parts, learning those parts, and finding out nowadays that, you know, everybody comes in, sings a verse, or three, you know, 2 lines, and then it's like punch, punch, punch.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see, or to know, at this point for you, you know, has that influenced you, or you cut the copy and paste and still, you know, put those things together?
That's a great question. I basically do a little bit of everything. I do linear. I like linear. I like the idea of a performance from start to finish. But I also like the idea of coming up with a great loop and just running it into the ground. That's cool too. I mean, they both work. I think the important thing is that the technology exists to do it any way you want to do it. Just because you can copy and paste doesn't mean you have to copy and paste. You can just play from start to finish whatever you want to play. So it's just a matter of using it where it works for you. I think that's the important thing to keep in mind there. But I'm good either way. I'll tell you what, we did a record, where our group got back together the time, we called the record The Original 7 because Prince wouldn't let us have the name at the time, for whatever reason. But we did a song on there called If I Was Your Man. And If I Was Your Man has, you know, big drums on it and big bass and the whole thing. I'll tell you that song was recorded at Mammoth, which is a ski place in LA, in California, on my laptop in the chalet. Every bit of that song was recorded there, which showed me that it's more about getting it down right, you know? Because I think, listen, at the end of the day, we're all engineers. Like, I feel kind of weird saying engineer, because I don't really feel I'm an engineer, but I can get it down, and that was a good example of that. So I just used the technology that was available to me. So, thanks. Yep. Oh, okay. So they're giving me the cutoff sign, which is fine. So here's what we'll do. I'm hanging around. I'm not really going anywhere. I'm happy you guys are standing up for questions, right? I will make sure that we can talk one-on-one, and I'll get to your questions, I promise you. I'm sorry about that. I went too long on my talking and not enough Q&A, which I thought I was going to do. So I just want to wrap it up. I just jotted a couple little quick things down. I think that a basketball coach told me, because I'm really into basketball. I got a son that plays now at pretty high AAU level, Well, Kenny Smith's his coach, so he's playing at a pretty high level, so that's pretty cool. But so the pessimists and the people that raise their hand who are pessimists, we have the optimists. We have more optimists than pessimists. What he said to me was the pessimist complains about the wind. Okay? So you pessimists, it's a windy day and you're going, damn, it's a windy day. Right? The optimist expects it to change. The optimist is going, yeah, but it's going to be good times around the corner. You know, after the rain comes the sunshine. So a lot of you raised your hands. All of you that didn't raise your hands, because maybe you didn't fit into, maybe you're just bored, but maybe you didn't fit into either one, you guys are the leaders. The leaders are the people on a windy day, they fly a kite. Okay? They're the ones that set the sail to sail, right? You adjust the sails. That's what we're in the process of doing. That's to me what this weekend is about. It's about adjusting the sails, not being a pessimist about how it used to be, not being an optimist that, oh, everything will be fine, but adjusting the sails and making it happen and being leaders. These are leaders in this room. These are creators, these are technologists. That's who's here, right? We're going to set the tone for what happens in the future. And I would say that people that are afraid of tomorrow, I'll wrap it up with this. Today is the tomorrow you were afraid of yesterday. And look, we're all still here. So, with that, have a great convention, and thank you for having me.
When Steel Talks, everybody.